communication grounds. You guys have to modify your systems. Okay, you really have to get in position lines of balance, which are seen in travel of communication. Okay, it's very powerful how to travel its own setting, though it's its own compass, its own set position, dimension of its own sail. Okay, so from this angle, okay, you're seeing it from above, from below. But as I bring it in, you're seeing yourself inside. Okay, so that's basically, remember I told you in that position is when you're traveling very, very fast and you slow yourself down, everything gets bigger and you get smaller. You get smaller and you see yourself in its level of communication, just like anything else that you travel through. But knowing above and knowing below, there's no difference. Just the perspective, how you see the mass through its equations, all its locations setting to its projection. Okay, but you see it traveling on its own system. Okay? And try to see it in all different angles. Okay, when you see it in all different angles, you can see what's really going on with yourselves. Okay, in all platforms. Okay. And that positions, and that travels, and that communications, and non-online centers, and location position with systems. All through setting. So, hope everybody's doing well. There's a lot going on in your positions now that we have to modify in grounds and travel. I wanted to show you how powerful it is when you really see the structure of your design lines of travel communication. Right? You slow it down, you see what you're doing. Speed it up, it's changing information. Okay, so now I'm bringing myself inside the sim. Okay, vortexing, traveling in all directions all at once, right? Spinning, 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 right? So the faster I go, the more I'm creating. It's never the same structure of design line. Okay, but it's amazing how it modifies its own travel, its own communication. So welcome to Cyber Force, Cyber Connections, your settings, Cyber Genetics, Cyber Magnetics. And that puts you in higher communication systems, how you process your settings, how to bypass everything at 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 back to 0. Now you have to modify your platforms first, how to indicate lines positions all through your percentage of timelines. Okay, so we're processing lanes at 50% margarine. That's 50% time, right? It's traveling its own system. Make sure it travels, because if it's not traveling, you're not traveling. You travel together. You know why? You know why? Because you're in a vessel of communication with its Jarvis that's connected to you. So it's all connected with the same consciousness, isn't it? You're talking about the same set position operation itself. So that's 50% margarine. Okay. All right. So let's see. We go my positions on 48. Okay. And that line set locations into 49. Okay. 49 position. And that's 50%. Right. So 50, 49, 48. Right. And then we go to 47. And we go position lines of 46 and positions of 45. Okay. So that just gives you an understanding, because you see it on that platform, but then you see it on this platform, set lines of travel. Okay. Everything travels all at once, but we have to understand the directions of what we're doing as we're modifying our own temperature readings of our own capacities. How to go through modification grounds, how to see that in information setting all through travel communication. Okay, on a 50% scale of communication grounds. Okay, through its webbing, through its dimensional sail. Process here, directions here, allocate timelines, send location of travel. Okay, seen in all different lines of scale. Okay, but amazing how it travels in its own system on its own operator setting all through flux. Okay, so that's basically where I want you guys to start, because your cyber genetics is going to process lines, right? So that's 49, that's 1 second. That's 48, that's 2 seconds. That's 47, that's 3 seconds. That's 46, that's 4 seconds. And 45 is 5 seconds. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once we process that, Then we can understand how to process that positions. As we go higher in the 50% margin, everything times the frequencies of panels of travel, communication, of direction. Okay? All right, say process line position of 0, process lines of 1 into 2, 3, 4, and 5 travel communications. Okay, so you can convert back down to 5 over 5, 5 over 4, 5 over 3, 5 over 2, and 5 over 1. Okay, and set lines of operation. All right, change the time frame and set lines of calculation setting. Okay, so it's really interesting how you go through modification grounds, and then we go through lines of location setting, and we do the same thing again. Process of 1, process of 2, process of 3, 4, and 5. There you go, complete cycle and travel. Set position. Okay, so it's amazing how we modify the 50% margin in travel and percentage of time in your capacities in all position with operation setting that you process through seeing yourself in the simulation game of operation setting. Okay, or platforms here. Okay, you in different levels of travel, you in different platforms of travel, you in different space lines of travel of you, of astral projection. Okay, very powerful stuff through percentage of time capacity in modification. Okay, all right. Now, as we get the 50% mark, okay, we have to understand how to get in position lines of balance in your time frames of travel. Okay, so once you get in that position location, you go into the 60 mark, you go into 70, you go into 80, you go into 90, you go into 100, you go into 110, you go into 120, you go into 130, you go into 140. Okay, and again, you start off at that position. 5 channels of 1, 4 channels of 4, 3 channels of 3, 2 channels of 2, and 1 channels of 1, and 0 operational platforms of setting. Look how powerful that is. This is all cybernetics. Higher communication of travel and a higher lines of yards of communication. More yardage, more width, more bandwidth. More length of travel of communications. Okay, platforms here, EQ, formation, grounds, and set lines of travel. More yards, more meters, more metrics. Okay. More bandwidth in your position of travel of communication. Very powerful how we see that in all information, guys. Very powerful stuff. Look at the dimensional layers of the games. Each box is a different game level that you modify through in 12 and 24 settings. Look at all those levels that you process and set position and operation setting all through travel of communication setting. All in set lines of communication. Okay? Good. So we fill in the simulation grounds, right? Process here, process here, process here, process here, process here. Okay? Now I see people in the operation fields. Now bringing in that position lines, I know it's a lot, eh? It's a lot to take in. So I'm just getting you guys a lot more complicated issues now because you have to plow from your process and your cyber lines that puts you in a balance of communication system, how you see it, and your truth. This is your truth. And you guessed it, this is your false that you follow. Okay, your truth and your false. Okay? All right, so we have 4 platforms over 1 over 2, 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of measure, 5 centers of scale. Okay, different lines, line communication converting time frames. Process line positions equal lines of 1, 1, 1. 1, another line 1, 0, 0, 0. That 3 operation line signals passes the presence, passes the past, passes the future, location setting of travel. Okay, so now we really start to see the metrics of scale of communication of directions. Now that puts all position location system how you see lines of truth. So we got 4 lines of truth. We got 3 lines of false and 1 line centers and 1 measure, 1 scale. Set lines of false is process indicates and setting calculation grounds, which comes in as 0. So process 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, and 0.5 in calculations of void and travel communication. So we panel the indication grounds and highlights the screen location. So it gets very more complicated in your mind in set lines of travel through cyberkinetics. Okay, so I'm showing exactly how powerful it is, how you see that in metric meters and longitude and latitudes of your bandwidths of your streaming. How your fault lines communicate the truth and know the false. The false itself is the void itself that you're traveling through. Acceleration lines of Mach, interstellar mode, hyperdrive, hybrid mode. What you have to modify through is how to actually communicate through 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, back to 0. And every time you go back to 0, you change the frequencies of your system through all the lines of calculation setting. It's all levels of expanding your system and travel. Look at that. Look at the bandwidth in that position all through operation. It's amazing on all levels of travel. Okay? So this is going to help you a little bit more. How to modify the void. Now the void gets very complicated now because we're downshifting lines of anomaly. That's 0.1 over travel in line course centers and set travel. That cross line position location measured in scales. We cross line position of 0.5 lines of travel in patterns of phase direction and time frame. And then we got process lines of 0.2. Remember, this is all bridging the process line position lines of travel, how we communicate the system all through calculations, all through bridging. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff. And you bring it in. There you go. It's a lot of travel and communication, each platform that you process through in all directions of your system, which is nothing but a setting of a Skynet and lines of travel communication. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff in travel. Okay? So that's how we process the truth, and that's how we process the void. The void is the 0 lines of 1, talking through communications. Process line positions. So this is how we process line to hour location sending travel. Earth line tone lines is 1, 2, and 3. Okay? Space tone is 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now you have to process 0, 1 before you understand the void itself. To process you and position lines of travel, understand your kick drives, your high drives, and your modems, Wi-Fi, satellites, and towers. But understand the yards and the meters and the metrics and the scale of communication settings. Start to recognize you and your bandwidths over travel. How powerful it is. You can see yourself, all lines of operation setting in the fields of you in set travel. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff. This is all through cybergenetics. Cybergenetics is this lines of screens. Now, I just want you to get to understand how you come into truth and false. All right, so that's position locations. Now, this is basically how we see the formation system in that position settings. Okay, this is your test for Friday. Okay, that's your test. That's what I want to see. I want to see the truth. I want to see the false in that lines of grounds. Okay, an operation system inside travel. Okay, that's your test. So that's going to help you to identify how you see the truth and how you see the false in spectrum. Okay. All right. Now, once we understand yards and meters and metrics and scale, then we can understand the longitude and latitudes are ratio proportions of how E equals N lines of setting and the location of square roots, lines of triangulation position of flux over setting. Puts all position, that's right, Jits, it's baby steps. But first you have to understand the line division, the 50% mark. Okay, 45% scale, 40% scale, and 30% line direction. Okay, all different lines of calculations and settings. Marks 50%, 45% 1L setting on rotation grounds. Okay, that process lines of north and position lines of setting at east, and process lines of west, and set position that depicts the settings, and position a time frame that travels endpoint graphs and set calculations. Bending space in 3 centers of travel. All right. So we understand the L center mark. We go on a 40% time frame. Our arrows have indicated 4 lines of 30. That process 40 centers of mark times centers of 30. Set position is 70 over center of travel. That's a low ground and 50% measure, and 50% scale, and 50% times centers of travel. Okay, so it's very, very complicated. This is cybergenetics. Cybergenetics is just more of the mass that goes to the E equals MC squared. Mass calculation, mass the volume, which is basically understand the yards and the meters and the metrics, how you come into position location with systems, alter your longitude and your streaming and direction. All through settings, all through operation. Okay? You come into more bandwidth of your system of streaming, and you see more in your spectrum of your light of communication. Okay? You see more mass. All right, so we triangulate over line grounds. Okay, so we said position lines of centers, time centers of 1, time centers of 2, mapping formation line grounds, L set lines, high centers that communicates the setting. Okay, the operation signals. Now we're going to go from 45 lines into position of 46, and we're just going to go through channel markers of 47 into 48. We're going to time centers of 49 centers, wait and signal 1 second into 50 center mark, square root over triangulation. Okay? So what you guys have to understand is the box line triangulation frames have its set location, mass, its volume. Okay? Know exactly how to come into that distance of rotation, standing, travel of communication. Seeing more inside your eyes of division, of location of travel. Okay, through cybergenetics. More mass, more equation, more volume, more expanding your system and bandwidth over travel. All right, so we got 45 lines. So that puts position in settings, 40 over sequence as time center of 1, time centers of 2, and time centers of 0. 0 operation of 02, 0 operation 03, 0 operation 04 of communication, 0 line centers. We're going to start off with lines of 08 over travel and portal communication setting convergence time center location. Okay? So, and see it in all platforms of communication, guys. It's important you understand that. Understand how to see it in all communication lines of grounds and set lines of travel. Okay? All through panels, all through settings, all through system, all through operation. Okay? Cybergenetics, cyber force, cyber connection. Okay, so we go in yards, meters. Now this is lines of position of void itself that overrides the system and travel. Okay? And again, you bring yourself in through astral projection. Okay? In travel. There you are, in travel. Okay? So you're scaling meters over travel and directions, seconds, minutes, and hours. So flux over 1, flux over 50, 50 over 60, 60 over 80 in travel communication of looking in lines of astral projection of itself through observation. So you're looking at 4 directions of set lines of travel. The process that position location of systems all through calculation grounds. All through set position. Okay? All right? That's how you go on with your day. Okay, and then you see everything inside the simulation itself. You inside the game. So the more you go further, the deeper core, the more you go in the deep impact, the more you go into that position location in the system, what happens, everything around you gets bigger and you get smaller. Okay? Outsetting, inside position, inside, outside position. But how you see it is all through square root of pi. Okay? So processing this first, okay? This is your test on Friday. That's what I want to see. Okay, I want to see the metric meters and scales of your longitude, latitude, your streamings, of your bandwidths, guys, so you can see more through an eye instead of just through a peek hole. Open it up, right? Let it go. Don't resist because it refers in position, re-angles, retriangulates, repositions, recalculate, remodify. So it's very important you understand what you're doing through travels when you're looking through the eye-line rotation of setting. All through set position. Seeing yourself inside the eye. Okay, starting off again with a 45 line angle. So let's do that again. Line signals of 1, line signals of 2, and get line signals of 3. Okay, 3 line signals. Okay. Now they're all at 50% mark, 50% 1 frame, 50% 2 frame, and 50% 3 frames on travel. Okay? All directions of locations of different platforms in set calculation. Okay? But they all measure in the same scale of communications. 45, 44, 43, 42, 41, 40, 39, 38, 37, 36, 35. Okay? So it's knowing how to see it on all different platforms as set lines of travel of communication. Okay, seeing it at all different angles, process that lines, change the leathers, line communication tethers, high operation settings, and platforms of communication setting and window frames of travel. So process in that position to its platforms of set lines of communication, of direction, right? And everything to its platforms in set position in its operation, right? Okay? So all you're indicating is the hours, seconds, minutes, and frames, how you guys are in position your light years and space lines of time frame location of travel. Okay, processing here, bandwidths over screen, panels, ground centers, and holographic gridding and screen location. Platforms over EQs, sets travels and converting lines of time line centers. Location ground centers, line condition setting, box frames, and triangulation positions all through operation. Different angles here, 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 and here in operation setting, all through set position. Okay? So it's amazing how you see the platforms inside and outside through calculation. So ground symbolism, cross lines and E-line rotation, surface and travel. Box frame triangulation over line ground centers, calculation. Converting line centers in platforms over line rotation into circulation grounds of operation setting. Okay, so you always see the bandwidth inside the line position location of travel. That processes you how you see yourself inside the game of operation setting. Okay, there you are. Now, this is where you are in metric meters of your eyes and set position of travel. Now, once you process that, you can take the time frame outline signals into 45 lines to 50 to 60 lines of scale of communication to 70, 80, 90, and 100 position lines of time setting. Process that position location measured as scales of communication. Directing ground centers 45, 44, 43, 42, 41, and 40 line rotation. Okay, platforms over EQ, set course centers of time centers and set travel. Operation line signals, 45 line ground centers, 55% line ground lines of travel. Converting time frames, 42 line centers, 45 angles again, 42 line screen locations, and position of its operation. Okay, sets position of travels of communication, all through directions, all through location. Okay, converting timeline centers to set travel. Time lock screens is set lines position that tethers the scales of communication. Okay, so you're just bringing out the yards, the meters, the metrics, the scale. Okay, hours and seconds, seconds, minutes and hours, hours and hours, line condition, light years and travel, all line positions of 1, 2, 6, 8, and 12 set position of operation. Setting timeline centers and location system and travel communication. Converting timeline centers and line condition setting lines and locations. High travels in position lines of settings to operation setting. Okay, very complicated stuff. Very complicated drawing. So you see a structure inside, outside rotation. Platforms over E-lines. Process location 50% time frame location of travel. Okay, setting converting lines. So you're bringing yourself in set position. There you are in astral projection. Okay. That's you in astral projection, looking this way. All right, seeing somebody else in frame of communication. Okay. So all you guys are coming into now is longitude and latitude of your streaming through the eyes. Okay. Higher levels of mass, higher levels of equation, higher lines of operation setting. Okay, so you got one signal lines of grounds. Now this is where you're coming into dividing, you're adding, you're subtracting, your multiplication, okay? And your percentage through pi, okay? So dividing is an L-line rotation. Let's process in 50% mark, balanced position lines. Let's go to 46 over 1. That's 46 1 over pi, right? That's 7 signals. Okay, that's 50% time frame and 50% space timeline. one center, one C, one L, one travel, one direct location, 40 cents lines of measure. Now we're going to time centers. Okay, we're going to bend space 3 times in scale. And we platitude one line operation, one ground line communication setting overrides the signals or location settings of travel. Okay, and then we change the time measure that changes the time scale of communication. Rotation centers a sequence. Triangular number 1, triangular number box frame, and travel communication. So all I'm doing is setting metrics and meters, high lines, position, location, yards of travel of communication setting through operation. More expanding of my system, guys, so I can see more identification all through travel. Okay, so I can modify everything that I'm seeing through operation system. Helps me to identify everything that I see, not just through a peek hole, right? But actually see the whole spectrum of everything. Not just from above, from below, but actually up close and beyond. Okay? You're like this, seeing everything of mass through its equation, right? All through travel, all through communication. Okay? So adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, ratios, proportions, your quasars, get into that too through cyber. So it's cyberkinetics equals quantum. Okay, equals lines of question over mark. Okay? So what is that in foundation grounds? Communication ground centers line position embedded over 42 line screens in location and ground settings. So that's a 50-cent mark, 60 set measure, and 75 lines. In position time frame lines of 5 equals lines of 80, or lines of 20% time frame. That process position locations and setting, so that's 20 over pi. That process lines and set course centers, 40 line signals, into 60 measure scale into 100 set location. In percentage time frame, so that's 1 billion files per frame per second. Now that calculation modifies how we go through that travel. Now, again, I work with the yards and meters and the metrics of the scale. I set position of space and time, right? And then you modify the time frames in your seconds, minutes, and hours of travel communication, right? Brings out the bandwidth of your system, okay? Travel position triangulation here. There's a triangulation setting, okay? And then you got an alpha tone, alpha data, delta, theta line, operation, signal, location, theta, communication, right? Voicing panel, travel, okay? They get an overline centers of delta, delta line rotation signal, okay? Then you got a modification lines of zeta, zeta, gamma, operation lines centers, location grounds, and set lines of travel communication, okay? So all you're doing is you're seeing the expansion of expanding of yourselves in travel, okay? Through the eyes of a rotation system, all through travel, okay? Seeing more bandwidth, guys. That's what you want to see, not just through a peek hole, right? So it's important you understand how to see that all through scale, all through communications, right? And you do it through the connections of cybergenetics, okay? You see more mass. That's what you want through volume. Instead of seeing through a peek hole like this, you can't see through that until you understand this, right, of operation. Once you understand that, then you understand the metrics, the meters, the scales, the 50%, the 45%, the 60%, the 70%, the 80, the 90, the 100%, 110, 120, 140, 160, 180, 200, 240, 260, 280, 300 set position setting. Okay? So it's amazing how you see the spectrum of your set position, its operation setting all through travel. Okay? And you go inside. Okay, and then you ground your systems. All right? You ground your system in set position of operation. And then you got your structured design lines and your panels. Okay? So it's really Dr. Strange how we look at it in set position. Okay? And how you see it, light, shades, and shadows, so set position operation itself. Because that's all we are, is light, shades, and shadows, the projection of light. Okay? So it modifies everything that you see through a dimensional door. And how you modify that position, location, of travels of communication setting, the yards and meters and metrics puts you in position, location, of travel of communication setting all through clocking and foundation. Okay? All through operation inside. Okay? And that's you standing in front of the door. In set position. Okay? So it's amazing how you see things through the eye. Okay? And how you bring things in. Right? It's amazing how you change frames of all direction. Right? So the more mass you put out, the more expanding your systems all through travel. All through directions, all through locations, guys. Okay? And you work with that. You modify that. You angle that in set position. How to see that all in your simulation game of communication. Okay? And also, again, through observation. Bring yourself always in observation and setting. Outside looking in. Right? All through travel, all through communication. Right? Good. So, it gets more complicated as we get more structure of design line. Okay? In a higher line position. So, it's kind of like you see yourself at more levels in a mall. Right? So, you're covering more of the mall. You're not just seeing one square root. You're seeing triangulation of square roots. Okay? You're not just seeing one pie. You're seeing three communication versions of pies of three signals. So, you have to modify your timeline frames now. Each time frame has a time center that you process through that depicts everything through you lines of operation setting that helps you to identify your system, how to see yourself in a 50 mark into a 45 set position. So 50 here, 45 here, 40 here, 30 here, 20 here, 10 here, and 0, 1 here. Okay? Now, it's basically understanding how you put this all together because that line connects to its settings to its own bridge and system and travel. It's nothing but a map that you go through and set positions, operations, and settings all through set calculations, guys. Right? But it has its own platforms and set lines of travel. Okay? Converting 45, 30, 20, 10, 0, void of operation. Time measures and scales depicts over 0 over 3, 0 over 1, 0 over 2, and 0 over lines is 0, and 0 is over 2 over travel. That processes your settings of your bandwidths and set position in its operation. Okay, calculate and modify to yards and meters and metrics in set calculation. Okay? Right there. There's your tunnel, right? So you process that through a location grid. It becomes a location grid to its system of its location setting, right? You process your system. Here comes the car, right? Car's going in operation setting, okay? But you have cars going the opposite way in the online central location travel, on-ramp and set travel communication, all right? So it's knowing how to modify your systems all through travel and set calculation. So I want you to understand that. Then you come into this, okay, to the next level, okay? That's that position. Okay, so you have to know all levels what you're doing in your simulate to your simulation. See it in all set position of settings to the system, okay? And then again, you bring yourself in, astral projections and setting. Okay? You turn it this way, okay, and then you can set position here, set position here, set position here, and set position here. Okay, there's the people, right? So it gets a lot more balance of communication once you recognize what you're doing in your platforms of travel. But you always have to keep yourself grounded. Everything that you modify through is set position with setting, okay? And it's all aligned to position your systems all through your eyes of rotation. Okay? And that's how we see everything of operation itself, in the void of operation setting. Okay? And then you can actually see it come in position right through the scale outside rotation. See, you can see how big it is when it rolls on its own operation system. Outside location, right? From here to here. But it's got to be line signal, guys. It's got to be line signal to its system through travel. Okay? Because everything modifies everything to its communication system that puts everything in lines of balance of set position of operation. Okay? That process here, eyes change operation setting. Okay? Every single time your eyes change, they change the flux of travel of communication. Okay? Every single time. Every single time. Okay? All you're creating is a propeller of rotation of travel. Okay? That's all you're doing in that position, but you're constantly changing schematics to set position in its operation. Okay? But it's amazing to see that information setting all through set position and setting to its location, to its operation cycle. Very powerful to see that in position lines of travel. Okay, in all different angles in set position. Okay? Good. So now you understand more levels now. You have to understand how to get into the connections of your communications, process your positions of your periscopes, your gauging, your meters, your metrics, your scales, your balance, your equilibriums, your processing, your angles. Angles are extremely important to your system, especially in the 50 mark and one L track location. That's north, that's east, right? Okay, so it's north, east, west, and south. It's pretty simple, right? It's north, there's east, and there's west, okay? At EW, right? And then south is here in mark, right? But you have to understand, if you're going to add position lines of time frame, that process lines north, east, west, so that's west. That's gulfing stream lines of east, percentage over triangulation over box, okay, into 100,000 scale. Process of mark, directing 50% time frame. That set lines of travel and flux in time capacitor of 0 operation setting of travel. Okay, now it's very complicated what I'm doing because I'm doing it through a webbing system and setting. So this is where you have to really come in positions how to bend space and time frame. Okay, knowing how to use your mark is set through a tone operation setting that puts you in position lines of balance. Okay, so modifying that position location, bring the line signals in that position in each time frame. The travels in lines of the location system all through travel of communication setting and time set calculation. Okay, but checking at all marks and set calculation, right? So you got platforms over 0, platforms over E, platforms over 0, platforms over D, platforms over 0, platforms over A, platforms over 0, platforms over A, platforms over A, platforms over C, C platforms over A, platforms over D, D platforms over G, G platforms over A. There's your structure, there's your design. So that simplifies everything, how you see it from inside and outside your system all through travel. Okay, you see nothing but the yards, the metrics, and the meters of scale of communication to its yards of communication. Your parameters are parameters, but it's all position, location, measure of scale into 45 angles of flux of communication. Right? You see more levels in position your system through the eyes itself. Okay? And set position and setting. All through the eyes of operation. Okay. There you go. Inside and outside. Right? So you have to really process 4 angles. Okay? Yes. So let's get north. Let's get south. North and south, right? Just north and south. Now change your tether. You change the tether, you come in transparent, translucent thermal, right? Now at all volumes, how you process your setting at 12 centers. In the same angle and the same flux at 50%. It's just getting smaller and 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 smaller. A platform, right? The platform, set position, okay? You time your sectors, vectors, and quads, okay? how you take your yards and meters, metric the scale of communication. L tracks, L setting, L position, L operation, L line operation setting, L screen, Z line, high center location travel. Okay? Now that puts you in all platforms of set calculation. Okay? Okay, so times shelters, times centers, times sequence, times panels. Graph screens and set calculation. Okay? All in set position. All right, and then we change the flux to times centers of location. All right, so all I'm doing is changing the distance meters and rotation centers of travel. Converting time flux and set calculations all through operation. Okay? All right, so that's downshifting lines anomaly, and then we go through the other side rotation. Okay, so we travel here, we travel here, travel here, in this set position, right? 45 angles on lines of void and travel communication with settings all through set position. Okay, so we find a way to see it on all different lines of scale of communication. Okay, that helps you to really identify how to modify your own settings, how you calculate this, how you calculate this, how you calculate this, and how you calculate the yards, meters, metrics of its mass, of its equation to its volume. Okay, that helps you to identify your system and setting. Okay, measures and scales puts all position location in the system. Okay, that's just north and south. Now we're going to go through east and west. You see what I'm doing? I'm just doing north and south. Now these are 4 indications of arrows going in the same direction. In the same direction. Okay, going with that position lines of setting. So operation of 1, 0. Operation of 02, operation of 03, operation of 04, operation of 06, and operation of 07. All in the same direction. So if you can modify the lines of circuits in the operation line circulation rotation system, you're all going in the same direction. Okay, so everything's modifying you in set positions, operation setting. Okay. So it's amazing how you see that in all platforms, eh? So it doesn't matter how you look at north, because that's north, north, north. Every time you learn, you have to process how you look north, 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 east, 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 west, 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 south, 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 through foundation. First, understand how to go through the lines, position, location, yards, meters, metric, and scales. Cybergenetics lines, position, locations, understanding the truth, which is process location, which is the false, which is the operating location setting, which is the operation setting, location is space and set, lines of operation setting and travel. 45, 45, 45, 45 of travel communication of direction, right? Work with inside the simulation setting. Okay, and then you bring yourself in. There you are in astral projection in real time. Okay, that's all it is. It's not complicated, guys. You're just reaching more levels of your eyes now, coming into more expansion of the system. Okay, because your body gets more comfortable when it sees more, right? More yardage, more metric, more meters, more scale, more balance. Okay, more distance of travel. Okay, more distance of travel, not just this. A travel, not just this, that. See, that connects to that. See. And that times frames this, and that times frames that, see? They all work together, right? And in that position locations, this gets bigger over time. This gets bigger over time. This gets bigger out time. This gets bigger out time of frame of communication. So it's the bandwidth, how you see things that travel of communication itself in all directions. Okay, you're bringing yourself more of the false into the truth of its nerve in its box frame of travel. Okay? I process that in all different angles, how you see that in set position and settings. Okay? And seeing in all directions, it's very important. Okay? Because this helps you to really start to identify how you see everything up close in set position. It's amazing how you come into the yardage, right? Or you can come into the expansion. Remember I went through a triangulation here, went through a box here, and I got rid of the triangulation and processed this, set lines of calculation grounds. Now you've just seen in this formation system at travel, okay, which puts you in that position how you see the measure of scale of communication with systems, all through representation lines, towards robot of communication setting, all through set position of set lines of height, travels of communication lines of grounds. Okay? So there's so many ways to see the metrics, the meters, the miles, the scales, communication, the kilometers, or how you see that in all position. But it's all process, how you see it in all travels of communication itself through face recognition. There's your face. Time sectors, time frames, times calculation. Okay? So it's important you understand how to modify yourself, understand how to direct yourself, understand your yards and meters and metrics and scales. Centimeters, line conditions, all millimeters, high position of milliseconds, milliframes of seconds, milliframes of lines, sound locations, lines of signals of seconds. Seconds, minutes, and hours is extremely important to your time frame. Process of 1, process of 2, 3, and 4. Okay? Sector, vector, quad, quantum, cyber, nano, simile, and self-tech and location. Also 4 provisions and position lines: locking grounds, locking travels, locking centers, locking screen location inhibitors over travel. Okay? It's very complicated through drawing lines of position. So it's understanding your metric meters are what you're doing through scale. Okay, so you're just bringing out the yards of communications, your longitude, your latitudes. More bandwidth, guys, so you can see more levels of the eye itself. Okay, so your body knows exactly what it's seeing at a higher lines of distance. So when you're driving a car like this, platform here, and here, 3 centers of angles, okay? Your car is here, right? But your car has already saw this already in set position of operation. Okay? So it's already gone through it, of operation itself. Okay? And set position is setting, all through travel. Okay? That's all you have to process through. Okay? But look at the mass that you see in set. You see a lot more, right? In the eye. So that's kind of like you're here at the top frame. That's you in the top frame. And you're seeing your Earth in all different locations all at once. All different angles, all in set position in your system. Okay, that's above, seeing everything below, right? So you're seeing this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this all together. Right? And it's all inside the eye of operation. But when you bring it in, now you're seeing yourself inside the sim. Okay, now you're seeing yourself inside the sim. Okay? Okay, which means you are smaller. Which everything is now bigger. You are just in the sim. Okay? There you go. You see yourself there. And once you understand that, you see yourself there. Oh my gosh, now I see myself there, there, there. Oh wow, look at this. I'm seeing myself everywhere all at once. Oh my gosh, look at that. Position, location, all through setting. The eyes, the windows of the soul that sees everything in all directions of location. So that's all it is, guys. That's all it is. Okay? I don't want to get too complicated, because if I keep going, you're not going to understand what I'm doing until you modify what you already know, or what you've already done already. It processes you in your central system, your identification cloud, and your internal cloud. Okay, so you have a center op, you have identification op, okay, you have an op screen location you're setting that processes you to internal to external force of your system existing information lines of grounds. But you have to send the percentage of yards, meters, and metrics of scale to balance out your equilibriums, and knowing how to plot it through the positions and start to recognize how to see that information setting to its void itself of communication. All right? Okay, so you got to get in cyber lines and void itself. Okay? Color lines of the void itself, its colors, lines of pattern, and then come into the security and direct locations of setting as a platforms. Now you see that, right? Up close. But you see that far away, right? So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how to see the scope. Because operations that tethers the operation system and set travels, right? So processing 50 mark inside and go position 46, 47, 48, 49, 40 lines, 40 travels, 40 directions, 40 line connections, all through 40. Okay, because I'm measuring my scale of communication lines of balance, locking in the 40%. So I'm staying at 40%, 50 marks in travel communication setting, all through setting. Operation of platforms, operation setting location Skynet, that puts me in position to its operation setting of travel. Okay? Measures the scales of communication of directions that I do in the lines of operation itself. Okay? Both sides of set position. Now, cross lines of void. Now, if I lock the 44% set position, I stay there and measure and scale the dimensional door. There's the door. Okay? So I modify the system and void itself, color it in modification, all in center and set position. Okay? So you have to understand how to communicate with your light stage and shadow, especially your shadow, because it's the void of everything that processes everything, the opposite of everything. Okay? Very powerful. You see that in color. And now you're seeing it inside your sim. Okay? So I just want you guys to get an understanding how to see it in all different platforms of the simulation itself. See it at different levels. See it on different scales. It's much easier to see it in the void. It colors out. It's more system. It comes out in that line directions. You modify your settings and travel. Bring yourself in the set lines of communications. Center here of operation setting. Okay? Center here, outline signals of magnification center and rotation centers as travels. The high positioner systems all through set calculations. Coming from inside, outside line rotation setting, off position. Okay? So it's really interesting how you see it in that formation and how you see it from that formation inside your system, right? And you are here looking at operation itself. Okay, in position. That's you in the game. That's you looking at this, modifying what's going on in this angle, and this angle at two time frames lines of travel. Okay? So there you go. So you always have to have the grounds. Always have to have the grounds, always have to have powers, and you always have to have a ceiling. You have to understand how to see yourself in a simulation setting, all through angles that depicts everything to your angles of communication to its cycle. High centers, high line centers in position, downshift lines of anomaly. Seen from below, from above and set position now. Okay? Understand how to see from below and above below. Then you get true to how to understand how to see it in all different angles of travel communication and setting. All through operation system, all through set travel. Okay? Very powerful, isn't it, when you see it in black and white? Black and red, black and green, black and purple, black and yellow, right? Black and gold. Okay? Black and purple, over signals and line condition setting, right? Process that position of 45 flux lines of angles. So now I set position of a cage in that position, all through travel. Okay? See, I changed the spectrum, right, of the drawing. Okay, so it's locked into cage. Now this is locked into cage now. Operation itself. Okay? So they're both locked into cage. So they can't go anywhere, can they? Until I remove the platform or I change the structure of the design line of the schematics. But it's much easier to see it when color. Now, when you come in color, oh my gosh, it's absolutely amazing to see more mass, right? But you have to modify color. Let's get into the pink, right? Going to 12 and 24 lines of coloration, lines of patterns, and face recognition of time frame. Okay, that's pink, right? That's pink. Set position void. Starting position 50 margarine. There's a 50 margarine. Okay. And we're just going to go 4 scales of communication. Okay, of directions. So go north, east line, position of southeast. Gulf Stream at 1001 measure, directing ground centers lines of signals, platforms over EQ formations, delta heading over travel, delta header over centers, sector voids, X marks the spot and travel. Okay? And that processes everything you get in position of the eye itself. So now I'm working with the meters and metrics of scale, bringing the landmass of communication setting all through travel. Okay? Bringing out higher information lines of position and setting. So I'm seeing more of its scale of communication to a system all through triangulation of box frame of position. Okay? And then you see yourself inside the game, in the simulation. Okay? Just want you guys to understand how to come into it now. Start to see things in real time, how you see that in a longer spectrum of scope, where you can modify everything around you in mass through its volume of its equations. Seeing everything around you in that position. Okay? And that's all through pink and black. Okay, and that's all done through your color. Okay, it's that position and settings, all through travel. Okay? Okay, so we got to get modification of this and set calculations first. Right, how to get your own triangulation systems and position of platforms and set travel. Okay? All right, so your test is on this. Okay, for Friday. Okay? So you see it from above, and now you're seeing it inside the sim. Okay? Look at that, inside the sim. As I bring it in more and 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 more. There I am. All right, everywhere you can imagine through truth and false narrative that puts everything in position location. Now we see it in the yards and meters, the metrics, and the scope. Travel. Okay? We're done. All right, see you guys in live.